Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a year that has been called, without much exaggeration, the worst time to be alive. Imagine this. You wake up, rub your eyes, and step outside expecting to squint at the morning sun, only to find that the sky is dim, muted, and strange. The sun is there, sure, but it's pale and weak, like a lantern whose oil is running out. Shadows blur, colors dull, and no matter how long you wait, the light never strengthens. It's as if someone has thrown a dirty veil across the heavens. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the days, noticing how your body feels heavier, as though the air itself has thickened. No clock ticks in your room, but you feel it in your bones. Time itself has gone strange. Days bleed together because the usual rhythm of dawn and dusk has blurred. You glance up at the sky, but the sun looks more like a faint disk behind clouds than the life-giving orb you've always trusted. You'd swear it looks like the moon trying to fake a day job. Historians call this event the Mystery Veil of 536. According to one Byzantine chronicler named Procopius, the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during the whole year. Sounds poetic, right? But in the moment, it would have been terrifying. Imagine you're a farmer in early spring, ready to plant your fields, only to find that the warmth just isn't coming. Your crops won't sprout, your animals shiver, and you start thinking, maybe the gods have abandoned you. And here's the quirky tidbit that really gets me. In Ireland, written records describe a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. Not just a shortage, an actual failure of bread, which is basically medieval shorthand for, we can't even make toast. You can picture someone back then muttering, "Great, no bread for breakfast again. Thanks, mysterious sky." Theories today point to a massive volcanic eruption somewhere in the northern hemisphere. Iceland is a strong candidate, though some geologists suggest eruptions in North America, or even multiple volcanoes working tag-team style. Historians still argue whether a single catastrophic blast caused it all, or whether a series of smaller eruptions kept dumping ash into the stratosphere. Whatever the cause, fine particles of volcanic glass scattered high above the earth, creating that eerie veil. The effect wasn't just visual. Imagine walking through your fields and finding a thin, gray dust coating everything. You run your fingers across a leaf. It feels gritty, like sand where it shouldn't be. You sip from your water jug and it tastes faintly metallic, the way it does if you've ever drunk from an old tin cup. Every breath you take carries a hint of dryness, scratching the back of your throat. You cough more often, and your neighbors start coughing too. This twilight world messes with your mind. Nights are darker than usual because the moon's light is dimmed as well. Days are dim, evenings gloomier still, and the human brain craves light. You start to feel sluggish, almost depressed, without really knowing why. Seasonal affective disorder exists today because of a few cloudy weeks. Imagine the whole world stuck in permanent cloud cover. No wonder people thought the apocalypse was right around the corner. And yet, here where the sarcastic voice in the back of your head kicks in, you probably won't survive this. I mean, unless you happen to have a hidden stash of jerky and grains sealed away, you're going to have a rough time. It's like Mother Nature pressed the hard mode button on life, and you didn't even get a tutorial. By midsummer, frost nips at your fields at night. The sun is weak, unable to warm the soil. Some mornings, your breath fogs even though it's supposed to be July. You wrap yourself in cloaks and animal hides, wondering why summer feels more like early winter. The birds sing less, the bees buzz less, and even the insects seem confused. Word spreads from travelers and merchants. It isn't just your village. The entire known world is under the same strange dimming. From the Byzantine Empire to China, people record the same eerie sight, the sun refusing to shine. That, more than anything, is unsettling. Because if your tiny village were cursed, maybe you could appease a local god. But if the whole world is cursed, well, good luck finding enough goats to sacrifice. And of course, in classic human fashion, people start blaming each other. Maybe it's the pagans, maybe it's the Christians, maybe it's the Jews, maybe it's the guy down the road who keeps looking suspiciously cheerful. The sky is dark, the world is cold, and nothing bonds a community like the desperate search for a scapegoat. As you huddle near your fire at night, embers glowing like little red eyes, you wonder how long this twilight will last. Surely the sun will return tomorrow, right? But tomorrow looks the same, and the day after, and the day after that. The worst part isn't the cold or the hunger, it's the uncertainty. You don't know if this will last weeks, months, or forever. You've built your entire life on the promise that the sun rises and sets, crops grow, and seasons change. Now that promise feels broken, and when nature itself breaks its promises, humans start to crack too. By the end of the year 536, famine is on its way. The sun has dimmed, the seasons have shifted, and you're left staring at fields that look more like barren wastelands. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a child crying because there's no bread on the table. Somewhere closer, your stomach rumbles, reminding you that you're in the same boat. The year without light has only just begun. You wake one morning expecting the bite of cool spring to have faded, only to find frost still clinging to the grass. You rub your eyes, thinking maybe you overslept into autumn, but no. The calendar, the animals, the rhythm of the days all say it should be midsummer. Yet here you are, watching your breath puff in the air like it's January. The year 536 has turned into what later writers would call a year without summer. Your neighbors are just as bewildered. Farmers tramp out into their fields, scratching their heads over stalks that sprouted thin and yellow, then shriveled before they could ripen. Wheat kernels are tiny, barley doesn't mature, and fruit trees carry nothing but twisted leaves. The ground seems to mock your efforts. Planting seeds is like tossing hope into a frozen grave. Food shortages creep in slowly at first. Maybe you had enough grain stored from last year to last through spring, but by midsummer your supplies run low. The first hungry weeks don't look too different. You water down porridge, cut thinner slices of bread, sneak an extra handful of weeds into the stew. But by late summer, when harvest should be filling your barns, the reality sinks in. There will be no harvest. It's hard to describe what this feels like unless you've seen shelves go empty. You know how during a modern panic, people clear the supermarkets of toilet paper. Now picture that, but it's bread, the most basic food of life, and there's no resupply truck rolling in tomorrow. Families turn to eating bark peeled from trees, roots boiled to mush, even grass if they're desperate. Chronicles from Scandinavia describe people grinding pine bark into flour, baking it into loaves so dense they could double as building bricks. The bread keeps you alive, but your stomach twists in protest. One quirky tidbit. In China, records from 536 mention yellow dust falling like snow, while unusual summer frosts destroyed crops. Imagine standing in a field as little golden flakes drift down, only to realize they're not pollen, not blossoms, but some strange ash blown from halfway across the world. Farmers thought heaven itself was shedding its skin. You wander through villages, and the same grim story repeats. Mothers hush their children, whispering promises they can't keep. Old men shake their heads, muttering that they've never seen such a season in all their years. The livestock grow thin, ribs showing, because you can't waste grain-feeding animals when your own children are hungry. Eventually, many families choose to slaughter their cows or goats early. hopping to squeeze one last feast before famine takes them. The nights fill with the sound of animals being butchered, not for celebration, but for grim survival. Historians still argue whether the strange climate was caused by a single volcanic eruption or several spaced out in cruel succession. But what's clear is the impact. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped by an average of 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. That may not sound like much, but when you live on the edge of survival, those degrees are the difference between fertile fields and empty ones. Think of it like your phone battery dipping just a few percent, but that's the margin between sending a text and the thing dying in your hands. Except here, the battery is civilization's food supply. By late summer, people start traveling in search of food. Families pack their belongings on carts, abandoning homes that no longer promise survival. Roads fill with gaunt figures, begging or bartering with whatever they have left. Some show up at monasteries, hoping monks will have mercy. Others go to towns, where merchants guard their grain tightly, charging outrageous prices. A single sack of barley might cost what used to be half a year's wages. Do you sell your cloak, the one thing keeping you warm at night, just for a few handfuls of meal? These are the kinds of decisions that grind your soul down. And just when you think things can't get bleaker, the weather turns meaner. Frost in August, snowflakes in September. Not the gentle kind you'd welcome at Christmas, but biting, unwelcome snow that strips the last green from your garden. You're left staring at barren ground where food should be, realizing winter hasn't even officially begun yet. Rumors circulate of cannibalism in distant villages. You can't confirm it, rumors in desperate times spread like wildfire, but the whisper is enough to chill you. A merchant passing through mutters, "In the north, they eat their own dead now." You try to laugh it off, but your stomach twists again. Hunger does strange things to people. And yet, even in misery, humans find scraps of humor. Someone in your village cracks a joke about making a new recipe called stone soup, where you boil rocks and pretend it's a meal. The laughter is hollow, but it's still laughter, and it reminds you you're not alone in this misery. You cling to that, because hope is thinner than bark bread these days. By the end of 536, famine stretches its claws across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Constantinople, the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, watches its food stores dwindle. In Scandinavia, entire settlements are abandoned, fields left barren as people migrate south. In Ireland, annals record not just a failure of bread, but years of famine following it. The memory of summer warmth fades, replaced by the gnawing question, will next year be any better, or will the sun remain a weak, pale ghost in the sky? The dim sun alone would have been unsettling, but soon you notice something stranger. Your clothes feel gritty, as if you've been rolling in dust, even when you haven't. You take a breath and cough, your throat scratchy, your tongue tasting like metal. When you look at your water jug, there's a faint gray film at the bottom. And when you walk out to the fields, you see it. Ash, so fine it almost looks like mist, drifting down from the sky. At first you think it's just local. Maybe a neighbor's fire, maybe someone's been burning brush. But the stuff doesn't stop. It settles on leaves, gathers in the corners of your house, sticks to your hair. You wipe it off, but within hours it's back again. It's like living under the slowest snowfall in history, except instead of flakes that melt on your tongue, this stuff stings your teeth and leaves a bitter aftertaste. The animals notice too. Chickens cough, if that's even the right word for the rasping sound they make. Sheep sneeze through dust-caked noses. Your cows swish their tails in frustration, eyes watery, coats dulled by the constant powder. The ash works its way into everything. The grain you grind for flour, the water you draw from the well, the milk you pour from a pail. Historians today believe this was volcanic debris launched miles high into the stratosphere. Tiny shards of volcanic glass, invisible to the eye, could travel thousands of miles on jet streams, circling the globe. But back then, you don't have a clue. To you, it's just the sky coughing up dirt on your dinner. And when food is already scarce, ash in your bread is not just unpleasant, it's dangerous. Here's a quirky tidbit. Tree rings from 536 show such stunted growth that scientists call it one of the worst years in 2,000 years. Think about that: trees, the quiet timekeepers of Earth, literally recorded the disaster in their wood. A pine in Sweden, a sequoia in California, even oaks in Ireland, all show scars of that mysterious veil. It's like nature itself signed a grim diary entry. Yep, 536 was rough. But living through it, you wouldn't have thought of tree rings. You'd have thought of choking. On bad days, the ash hangs so thick it blocks the horizon, turning noon into twilight. On worse days, it gets into your lungs, making your chest feel heavy. Some nights you cough until your ribs ache, and in the morning you spit up gray flecks. And you wonder, if the sky is sick, is it contagious? In villages, people start weaving cloth masks, not unlike the ones you wore in recent years, tying bits of wool across their faces. Do they work? Not really, but it feels better to do something. Some carry little cloths soaked in vinegar, pressing them to their noses. The sharp scent cuts the dust, but also burns your nostrils. Still, it's better than choking. You hear travelers tell stories of stranger sights. In China, they say, the dust storms are so heavy they blot out mountains. In the Middle East, chroniclers describe a thick haze that hides stars at night. And in Europe, sunsets turn an unnatural crimson, the sun sinking like a coal smoldering in ashes. You pause and look at one of those blood-red horizons yourself. It's breathtaking in a terrible way. Beautiful enough to make you stare, dreadful enough to make you whisper a prayer. Historians still argue whether this constant dust was from one single colossal eruption, perhaps in Iceland, or if multiple volcanoes joined in a grim chorus. One theory even suggests an impact event, like a comet or asteroid breaking up in the atmosphere, scattering debris worldwide. No matter the cause, the effect is the same. The planet itself feels poisoned, and you're breathing its fumes. Food becomes even less appetizing. Bread baked from flour laced with ash has a bitter, chalky taste. Soup carries the tang of dust, no matter how much you skim. Even meat seems tainted. The animals themselves have been eating contaminated grass. Every bite you take reminds you of the sky's intrusion, as though heaven itself is seasoning your food with despair. Yet oddly, people start saving jars of ash. Some swear it has healing powers, others grind it into poultices, hoping it will draw out fevers. Quacks and opportunists hawk sky dust remedies in towns, promising protection from famine if you carry a pouch of it at your belt. You roll your eyes, but then again, when you're starving, logic isn't always the first thing you reach for. Nighttime grows especially eerie. The stars are dimmed, often invisible. Instead of a glittering sky, you see only a faint glow, a world smothered under a dirty blanket. Priests preach that God has turned his face away. Pagans mutter that the sun god is dying. And you lie awake coughing, staring into the ashen dark, wondering if you'll ever see the Milky Way again. One evening, you try to wash the ash off your hands in a bowl of water. The moment your fingers touch the surface, the dust swirls into cloudy gray patterns like ink in parchment. And you realize there's no escaping it. The sky has moved into your lungs, your food, your very skin. It's no longer just around you, it's inside you. You sit by the fire one evening, brushing the ash from your sleeves when a traveler enters the village, cloaked gray with dust. He lowers his hood and whispers almost theatrically, "It was the mountain. The mountain exploded." At first you think he's spinning tailies to earn a meal, but then others arrive with the same story. Far in the north, they say, a volcano tore open the earth and spewed fire into the sky. Some swear it was Iceland. Others say it was beyond the seas in the west, in lands no villager here has ever seen. Whichever it was, people are convinced the ash in your lungs is the mountain's curse. The idea makes a cruel kind of sense. If you've ever stood near a bonfire when sparks leap upward, you know how smoke clings to your clothes even after you've walked away. Now imagine that on a planetary scale. Historians today believe a massive volcanic eruption, or perhaps several, blasted ash and sulfur high into the stratosphere in 536. Suspended so high, the particles didn't fall quickly but drifted around the globe for months, even years, turning daylight into twilight. And yet, historians still argue whether one volcano could cause so much chaos. Some point to Iceland, where volcanic soils tell tales of violent eruptions in that period. Others suggest a North American source, an eruption of El Chichon in Mexico or Ilopango in Central America, whose colossal blast scarred the land for centuries. And then there's the theory that it wasn't one, but multiple eruptions, each piling gloom upon gloom. Imagine being punched in the gut, not once, but again and again, each blow weaker than the last but never letting you recover. Quirky fact for you: ice cores drilled in Greenland and Antarctica preserve microscopic layers of volcanic glass, like nature's own forensic file system. Within those layers, scientists found chemical fingerprints pointing to eruptions around 536. Some shards match Icelandic volcanoes, others hint at equatorial blasts. The mystery is maddening. Was it north, south, both? The world may never fully agree. But living in 536, you wouldn't have needed lab equipment to know something went horribly wrong. Rumors spread faster than the dust itself. One merchant insists he saw rivers of fire pouring down a mountain slope. Another claims whole villages were swallowed in boiling mud. Someone else swears the sun itself coughed out the ash in anger. And who are you to argue? When your fields are bare and your children are hungry, any explanation feels as believable as the next. Superstition thrives in this uncertainty. Some whisper that giants beneath the earth are hammering anvils so fiercely they've cracked the ground. Others mutter that it's divine punishment, the world's fiery core leaking into the heavens as a warning. A monk in your village lifts his arms and declares the end times are here. He points at the sky, blood red at sunset, and preaches that the heavens are burning because of humanity's sins. Half the crowd scoffs. The other half crosses themselves nervously, just in case. Here, the unsettling part. You're not sure who to believe. Science, as you know it, doesn't exist yet, so every theory is just as strong or weak as the next. You want to laugh at the giant hammer story, but then you remember the strange tremors you felt weeks ago, the way your floorboards rattled. Could that have been the earth itself protesting? By late autumn, speculation has become entertainment. People gather at night, swapping theories the way you might trade memes today. One neighbor says the mountain that erupted was in the Far East, near the edge of the world. Another insists it was under the sea, and that's why fish are dying in rivers. Someone else mutters that it wasn't a mountain at all but a dragon, thrashing in its cave and belching smoke into the heavens. And honestly, in the dim haze of 536, the dragon theory doesn't sound that much more ridiculous than anything else. Still, one thing everyone agrees on: the explosion, wherever it was, changed the world. It's not just your village that suffers. Rumors confirm the same twilight falls across distant kingdoms. From Constantinople, the mighty heart of the Byzantine Empire, comes word that the emperor himself notices the weak sun. From China, messengers bring tales of frost in summer. And across the sea, in the misty lands of Britain, harvests are reported to have failed. It's a rare, terrible unity, everyone under the same gray veil. Historians today love debates, and this mystery is catnip for them. They pore over tree rings, ice cores, chronicles, and soil samples. Some even suggest a comet strike, shattering in the sky and raining dust. Others picture multiple volcanoes firing off like a chain of fireworks. But back then, in the silence of your cold home, all you know is this: something happened far away, and you're paying the price for it every single day. The thought gnaws at you. If mountains can explode and blot out the sun, what else might happen? Could the seas rise? Could the stars fall? You hug your cloak tighter and stare into the fire, trying not to imagine the earth cracking open beneath your feet. Yet part of you knows, whether it was a mountain, a comet, or a dragon, the world has changed, and there's no going back to the way things were. By the time the strange sky and bitter cold have lasted more than a season, the real crisis begins to take shape, not just in the heavens, but on your table. Hunger creeps into every corner of your life, soft at first, like a shadow at the edge of vision. Then, little by little, it steps into the center of the room. By the year's midpoint, famine isn't just a rumor, it's the daily reality. You find yourself doing mental arithmetic every time you look at your pantry. A sack of barley that once seemed ordinary now feels like treasure. Do you grind it into flour for a single hearty loaf, or ration it grain by grain into thin porridge that stretches through the week? Your stomach growls for the loaf, but your mind whispers, if you eat well today, tomorrow will be worse. Hunger teaches you thrift the way fire teaches you respect. Soon you're experimenting with things you'd never have called food before. Bark scraped from pine trees, dried and ground, becomes a powder you mix into bread. The result? Loaves that look like bread but chew like splinters, each bite a contest between your teeth and your dignity. Nettle leaves, boiled until they're limp, become soup. Roots, weeds, and even moss fill the pot. You know it's bad when you catch yourself staring at the family dog, not with affection but with calculation. Quirky tidbit. In Finland, archaeologists later found evidence that people really did bake bark bread during the mid-6th century. The flour was stretched with inner tree bark, producing loaves that were technically edible but probably about as tasty as a doormat. You can almost hear some poor villager muttering, "Bon appetit," before taking a bite and chipping a tooth. But the hunger isn't just yours. Look around. Families trade away heirlooms for a sack of meal. A gold brooch that once belonged to someone's grandmother now passes into a merchant's hand for a few handfuls of barley. Coins lose meaning. Why trade shiny metal when the only currency that matters is bread? And yet merchants thrive in times like these. You notice how the man selling grain at market now carries himself taller, chest puffed out, guards at his side. He names outrageous prices, and desperate people pay anyway. Do you hate him for exploiting suffering, or do you envy him for being clever enough to stockpile? That moral tug-of-war becomes part of your daily mental diet, as heavy as the hunger in your belly. Historians still argue whether the famine that began in 536 was worse in the north, where cold summers killed crops, or in the south, where drought added insult to injury. What we know is that food shortages were reported across Europe, Asia, and even parts of Africa. The Byzantine Empire wrote of bread scarcity, while Irish annals recorded multiple years of famine. Imagine the sheer scale. Not one bad harvest, not one unlucky village, but continent after continent groaning under the same burden. You notice people thinning around you. Children grow quiet, eyes hollow. Old neighbors vanish. Some slip into the forest to try their luck hunting. Others simply waste away in their huts. The usual sounds of village life, laughter, gossip, dogs barking, fade into silence, replaced by the low moan of hunger. And still you press on. You chew your bark bread, gag down the nettle soup, and cling to hope that next season will be kinder. But deep down, you know it might not be. Because famine has momentum. When fields lie barren one year, there's no seed for the next. When animals starve, there's no milk or wool to trade. Every shortage snowballs until the word hunger feels less like a temporary condition and more like a permanent new roommate you never invited. One evening, a family comes knocking on your door. They're neighbors you've known for years, people you've shared feasts and festivals with. Their child clings to the mother's dress, cheeks sunken, eyes watery. The father clears his throat and says, "Do you have anything to spare?" Your chest tightens. You look at your own stores, pitiful, barely enough for your household, and realize you can't feed everyone. So you give them half a loaf, knowing it may cost you tomorrow. That's the cruel arithmetic of famine. Every act of kindness feels like betrayal of yourself. Meanwhile, the rulers, the kings, emperors, local lords hoard what grain they can. Palaces stay fed while villages starve. Word filters down that Byzantine Emperor Justinian has stored up granaries, yet even his empire cannot escape shortages. The anger bubbles up in taverns and markets. "They feast while we gnaw bark," someone mutters. But rebellion takes strength and hunger makes people weak. The fury stays locked in hushed voices because no one has the energy to fight. Still, hunger doesn't just starve the body, it starves the mind. You notice how people lose interest in stories, in music, in laughter. The village bard strums his lyre one night, but the notes sound hollow when played to hollow stomachs. You try to smile, to joke, but jokes land flat. Hunger is a thief of joy as much as it is a thief of flesh. And yet somewhere in this bleakness there are flickers of resilience. A neighbor shares a recipe for acorn flour, bitter but filling. Children invent games with stones and sticks, pretending they're feasting kings. You yourself start keeping a mental list of foods I'll eat when this ends. Fat bread, fresh apples, roasted meat. The list becomes your secret talisman, proof that you still believe in a tomorrow with flavor. But by winter's edge, the famine has teeth. You wake in the night to the sound of someone crying softly in the next hut. Hunger has become the background noise of life, as constant as the ash in the sky. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a darker thought creeps in. If this goes on much longer, hunger won't just claim strangers. It will claim the people you love. As if famine weren't enough, something darker begins to creep into the edges of your world. It starts with rumors, always rumors. A merchant, thin as his donkey, trudges into the village and mutters of a sickness in the south. "Egypt," he whispers, as though the word itself carries infection. "Bodies piling in Alexandria, ships afraid to dock." You think at first it's just another tale, exaggerated like all tavern gossip. But then more travelers confirm it. A fever, they say, that begins with shivers, then swellings under the arms, and then silence. The sick fall fast, too fast for prayers to matter. And it's spreading, not lingering in one port. It rides the Nile, then the sea lanes, and now it heads toward Constantinople, the mighty heart of the Byzantine Empire. Here, where your stomach turns, you realize famine has already weakened everyone. A body gnawed by hunger is easy prey for disease. Your immune system, though no one yet calls it that, is as thin as your frame. One cough from a stranger and you feel your chest tighten in dread. The eerie truth is that this was the beginning of what historians later call the Plague of Justinian. Though its peak would arrive in 541, whispers of sickness in 536 already foreshadowed the storm. Carried by fleas riding on rats, the bacteria spread invisibly along trade routes. Today we'd call it Yersinia pestis, the same plague that centuries later would cause the Black Death. Back then, though, you just call it the pestilence, and you pray it passes you by. A quirky tidbit. Some people believe the plague traveled through bad smells, miasma, drifting on foul air. So households stuffed herbs, garlic, or even ground up sapphires into little pouches, hopping to filter the breath of death. Imagine coughing into your sleeve today while your neighbor ties a string of onions around his neck and swears he's safe. Desperate times, desperate remedies. The gossip spreads faster than the disease itself at first. In Antioch, someone says, half the houses are shuttered, whole families gone. Another swears that sailors refuse to unload their cargo in Sicily fearing infection. And then, the detail that chills you most, the fleas. People claim to see them swarming on clothes, biting travelers until their skin bloomed with red welts. You check your own arms nervously, scratching phantom itches. Historians still argue whether famine made the plague deadlier, or whether the two disasters were unrelated curses that just collided by cruel chance. What's certain is that starvation left populations vulnerable. Malnourished bodies fought poorly against infection, and crowded cities became perfect breeding grounds. You, in your village, hear only fragments, but even fragments are enough to stir dread. Night falls and you lie awake listening for coughs. Every sneeze in the next hut makes your pulse quicken. You imagine invisible armies marching closer, rats scuttling in granaries, fleas leaping in the dark. There is no border to stop them, no wall high enough. Ships carry grain, and in that grain scurry tiny stowaways, spreading death from harbor to harbor. And of course, fear warps behavior. Some villages bar travelers entirely, closing gates and posting guards. Others cling to charms and rituals, burning incense, lighting candles, making vows to saints. A priest in your parish declares that fasting will keep the pestilence away, which is almost funny, given you've been fasting involuntarily for months already. Still, you see how sickness changes the air itself. People avoid touching hands. Neighbors step back when someone coughs. The warmth of community cools into suspicion, each person quietly asking, "Are you safe, or are you already marked?" By winter, the whispers of plague grow louder. Constantinople braces, markets hum with fear, and travelers carry both news and potential infection. You realize with a hollow heart that even if the famine ends, another killer waits in the wings. It's like the world has queued up disasters in sequence, as if survival were a cruel game and each round comes harder than the last. So you draw your cloak tight, whisper a prayer, and keep your distance from strangers. Hunger gnaws at your belly, ash still scratches your lungs, and now, in the shadows, disease sharpens its scythe. The year 536 isn't finished with you yet. You might think rulers, those with crowns, armies, and fat treasuries, would be insulated from all this chaos. But in 536, even kings and emperors discover that power doesn't fill a belly, and crowns don't shine as brightly under a dimmed sun. Kingdoms across the known world stumble, some tottering like drunkards, others collapsing outright. In your own village, whispers about leadership are sharp. Local lords send tax collectors, demanding dues even though fields stand empty. Imagine a man knocking at your door, parchment in hand, saying, "The emperor still requires his grain." You glance at your thin bark bread and think, what grain? But argue, and the penalty could be worse than hunger. The rulers hoard what's left in their granaries, feeding soldiers and court officials while villagers trade heirlooms for crumbs. Constantinople, jewel of the Byzantine Empire, feels the strain too. Emperor Justinian, who once dreamed of restoring the glory of Rome, finds his ambitions weighed down by famine and looming plague. Historians still argue whether his wars of reconquest drained resources just when the empire needed every crumb for survival. Some suggest his projects, like the lavish rebuilding of Hagia Sophia, looked almost obscene when so many subjects starved. Imagine you, a peasant choking on ash, hearing that the emperor spent a fortune decorating domes with gold leaf. It's enough to make your empty stomach growl louder. In the north, things unravel even faster. Archaeologists believe whole settlements in Scandinavia were abandoned around this time. Crops failed, cattle died, and desperate farmers left homesteads behind, their wooden halls rotting in silence. Some scholars even connect this collapse with the later rise of the Viking centuries on, as though the memory of famine burned so deep into northern culture that it reshaped societies for generations. A quirky tidbit: Norse mythology may have preserved an echo of this disaster. Some sagas speak of Fimbulwinter, a great, sunless winter that precedes the end of the world. Imagine being a 6th century Norse farmer, staring at snow in midsummer, and thinking, so Ragnarok is starting. Great. Closer to home, smaller kingdoms falter. Petty kings lose followers when they cannot feed their warriors. Alliances shatter as hunger drives betrayal. A village that once swore loyalty to a lord now turns to another who offers even a handful more grain. Hunger doesn't just weaken bodies, it unravels loyalty. You see this play out in miniature in your own village. When rations are handed out, favoritism sparks resentment. One family gets a little extra because they're kin to the reeve, while another family goes home empty-handed. Suspicion simmers. Who is hoarding? Who is lying? Who is favored? The solidarity that once held the village together begins to fray. And when community frays, kingdoms crumble. Historians note that famine and unrest around this time destabilized Europe, Asia, and beyond. In China, records mention political turmoil following crop failures. In Persia, the Sasanian Empire struggled as resources dwindled. In Ireland, annals bleakly record failure of bread year after year. Everywhere, rulers wrestled with the same impossible question: how do you govern when nature itself has betrayed you? Sometimes they answered with cruelty. Soldiers confiscated grain at sword point, leaving peasants to starve. Other times, rulers tried generosity, opening granaries or reducing taxes, but generosity could only stretch so far when the stores themselves were running dry. You can almost picture an emperor staring at an empty warehouse, sighing, "Well, I tried." And rebellion. It flickered here and there, but hunger makes for poor revolutionaries. To rise against your lord, you need strength. To fight, you need full bellies. In 536, few had either. So rebellion smoldered but rarely blazed. Instead, people simmered in silence, muttering into their weak porridge, cursing lords they'd never meet. For you, the collapse of kingdoms feels both distant and immediate. Distant because you don't sit in palaces or wear silk robes. Immediate because every bad decision at the top trickles down into your life. Higher taxes, fewer rations, harsher punishments. When rulers stumble, peasants fall flat. By the end of the year, you've learned this bitter truth. When the sun dims and the earth withholds its harvest, even kings shiver, even emperors fret, and even mighty empires tremble. But unlike you, they at least have granaries and guards. You only have bark bread and a prayer. If famine makes kings stumble, it also gives rise to a very different kind of figure. The hustler, the opportunist, the merchant who sees misery not as tragedy but as market potential. In 536, with the world in twilight, trade routes quiver and caravans crawl with half their usual goods. Yet merchants appear everywhere, offering solutions, most of them cruelly hollow. You sit in the village square, your stomach aching, when a man rolls in with a mule cart covered in cloth. He lifts a sack and declares, "Grain from far-off lands, pure and fresh." The crowd surges forward, but when someone tears open a bag, the kernels are half moldy. He shrugs. "Still better than bark soup." And desperate as you are, you almost agree. Hunger lowers standards. What you once would have fed to pigs now feels like a feast. Merchants of misery thrive because desperation erases bargaining power. A silver ring might buy a handful of stale rye. A carved heirloom chest fetches a single loaf. You notice your neighbors selling family treasures, the sort of things passed down through generations, just to feed their children for another day. By the end of winter, the wealth of villages sits in the hands of a few traders, while the rest of the people own nothing but hunger. There are darker schemes too. Some traders grind up inedible seeds and sweepings from the floor, mix them with chalk or ash, and call it flour. You bite into bread and find grit between your teeth, realizing you're chewing stone more than grain. A small joke, though not funny. Your dentist bill would be astronomical, if dentists even existed. Instead, you just crack a molar and swallow the dust, grateful you're eating something. But not all commerce is cynical. In Constantinople, certain records mention officials trying to regulate grain prices, forcing merchants to sell at fairer rates. Historians still argue whether these controls actually helped or whether they simply drove the black market deeper underground. Because let's face it, whenever someone tries to regulate misery, someone else finds a way to profit from loopholes. On the fringes of the empire, other opportunists rise. Wandering healers hawk potions to protect against hunger. Some are just honey mixed with herbs, harmless at least. Others are more sinister, powders laced with metals or dubious tonics that make you sicker than you started. Picture yourself weighing a small vial in your hand while the seller whispers, "One sip and your belly will feel full for a week." You wonder if that fullness comes from strength or poisoning. Quirky detail. Some people wore charms carved from bones, sold by traveling merchants as hunger stoppers. The idea was that carrying them would trick your stomach into believing it was full. Spoiler, it didn't work, but hey, bone jewelry became surprisingly trendy. Merchants also manipulate fear. Rumors swirl of plague marching closer from Egypt, and suddenly there's a brisk trade in amulets, incense, and strange powders to purify the air. You watch as neighbors spend their last coins on these talismans, clinging to hope that a string of beads can keep death itself at bay. You learn quickly that survival now isn't just about finding food. It's about navigating a new economy of desperation. Trade fairs that once smelled of spices and bright cloth now reek of sour grain and desperation. Caravans carry less silk, more sacks of dried weeds passed off as miracle cures. Even simple barter changes. Where once you traded wool for salt, now you trade wool for a handful of withered turnip tops. And yet, you too become part of this system. One evening, you find yourself gathering nettles and dried moss, then swapping them for a crust of bread. You laugh at the irony. You used to curse nettles as weeds, and now they're your bargaining chip. Hunger doesn't just change diets, it rewrites economics. By the end of the year, you realize that famine doesn't just kill, it reshuffles society. Wealth flows upward into fewer hands, trust in merchants shrinks, and everyone carries a quiet bitterness. In this twilight world, morality bends as easily as a starving man's back. After all, when survival is at stake, the line between commerce and exploitation fades until it's almost invisible. As if the constant hunger and dim skies weren't enough, the heavens themselves seem to join the drama. You look up one evening expecting comfort, maybe a glimpse of stars to remind you the world is still steady. Instead, the sky burns strange colors, deep crimson streaks at dusk, glowing halos around the moon, and suns so pale they resemble silver coins rather than fiery orbs. People whisper, shiver, and cross themselves. You too feel a twinge in your stomach that's not hunger but unease. The sunsets are the strangest of all. Imagine standing on a hillside, your stomach grumbling, when the entire horizon lights up in a blood-red glow. Not the soft pinks you're used to, but fiery scarlet, as though the sky itself is bleeding. Neighbors gasp, children cry, and old men mutter about the end of days. Science now tells us volcanic dust scatters sunlight into bizarre colors, but back then, it feels like a cosmic warning. Halos form around the moon, white rings, sometimes double or triple. You've seen ice halos in winter skis before, but these are larger, lasting longer, like glowing hoops hung by unseen hands. They dominate conversations. Priests claim the rings are heavenly eyes watching sinners. Farmers insist they're omens of even worse weather to come. Historians still argue whether chroniclers exaggerated these visions, or whether the atmospheric conditions truly created nightly light shows. Either way, you know you've seen them, and they haunt your dreams. Daylight isn't comforting either. The sun refuses to shine with its old intensity. Some days it looks dimmer, as if a dirty veil is stretched across it. You find yourself squinting, not against brightness but against gloom. Your shadow on the ground appears weaker, like even it has lost energy. And remember, this is the 6th century. No street lamps, no electricity, no glow from phone screens. The dimness is total, pressing into every corner of daily life. Quirky detail. Some villages start treating roosters as prophets. People gather at dawn to see whether the birds crow on time. If the rooster crows late, folks panic, convinced the world has slipped further into darkness. Honestly, you almost admire the chickens. Nobody asked them to become timekeepers of the apocalypse, but here they are, squawking their hearts out. The skis also affect mood. You notice people walking with slumped shoulders, speaking in hushed tones. Without bright days, even laughter sounds softer, as though the gloom has muffled joy itself. You catch yourself forgetting what a truly blue sky looks like, and that realization feels heavier than hunger. Somewhere in the empire, scribes scribble feverishly about eclipses and comets, adding to the list of heavenly omens. A passing comet, long-tailed and shimmering faintly through the dust, becomes the centerpiece of local gossip. A sword in the sky, one woman whispers. Another insists it means kings will fall. You roll your eyes but secretly glance upward again, half afraid she's right. And yet, in this bizarre celestial theater, there's a weird beauty too. One evening, standing by a stream, you see the moon's reflection surrounded by shimmering circles of light. It's eerie, yes, but also mesmerizing, almost dreamlike. You realize you're living in a world where even fear wears a cloak of wonder. So each night you lie on your straw bed, staring upward, trying to read messages written in color and shadow. Is the sky trying to tell you something? Are these omens of the plague you've heard whispers about, or just volcanic dust twisting sunlight? You do know. No one does. But what you do know is this. When the heavens themselves look angry, survival feels even less certain. If the skis are painted in blood and shadows, then the people beneath them are painted in fear and faith. You wander through the streets of a weary village and notice how everyone is suddenly very religious, some out of genuine devotion, others out of sheer panic. Every strange ring around the moon, every red sunset, every failed harvest feels like a message from beyond, and people scramble to interpret it. Church bells toll longer now, echoing over empty fields. Monks march in processions, chanting prayers while carrying wooden crosses through town squares. Their voices are low and haunting, like waves against a cavern wall. You join in sometimes, not out of piety, but because it feels safer to sing than to stand in silence. When the world is falling apart, even borrowed certainty feels like a blanket on a cold night. Priests preach with fiery energy. One claims that God has darkened the sun as punishment for humanity's sins. Another insists the apocalypse is here, this year, right now. A softer voice tells you to repent and be kind to neighbors, for suffering is a test. Historians still argue whether religious leaders truly whipped people into hysteria or whether chroniclers exaggerated their sermons. But when you're standing shoulder to shoulder with starving peasants and terrified children, the tension in the air is undeniable. Superstition grows alongside formal religion. Your neighbor hangs garlic braids on his door, convinced evil spirits are causing the dimming sky. A woman down the road sprinkles salt around her hut every evening, muttering charms she learned from her grandmother. The fringe belief of the moment, that wearing the bones of birds on a string will protect you from sickness. It looks ridiculous, but honestly, if the sun itself can vanish, who's to say a bird bone necklace won't help? Meanwhile, relics become the hottest trade commodity. Monasteries proudly display splinters of the true cross, vials of holy oil, or shreds of saints' robes. Pilgrims travel miles to touch them, desperate for healing or reassurance. You witness one crowd pressing forward so tightly that a pilgrim faints, and instead of helping her, others just reach over her to get closer to the relic. Faith and fear mingle in a messy knot, as inseparable as smoke and fire. Sometimes you feel skeptical, even cynical. If God is punishing the world, you wonder, why punish Bobbies who never even had a chance to sin? You don't say it out loud. Sarcasm is not appreciated at church gatherings, but the question lingers in your mind like an itch you can't scratch. Still, you light candles, whisper prayers, and hope someone up there is listening. Quirky detail. In one monastery, a rumor spreads that monks are mixing crocodile dung into their ointments because it absorbs the darkness. You can't confirm it, but every time you smell a certain herbal paste, you wonder if that rumor isn't entirely made up. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about earlier? Apparently, humanity never stops experimenting with questionable goo. What strikes you most is how faith reshapes daily rhythms. People rise earlier to pray before laboring in fields. Families carve crosses above their doorways. Even casual greetings change. Good morning becomes God keep you. Fear has rewritten language itself. And yet, despite the fervor, the fear never fully disappears. When a child coughs in the night, parents clutch relics tighter. When frost hits the fields again, prayers grow louder but bellies stay empty. Faith doesn't solve the famine, but it gives people a way to endure it. It's like chewing on tough bread. You still feel hungry after, but at least your mouth isn't empty. As you sit in a darkened church, candlelight flickering, incense thick in the air, you realize faith is not just about salvation. It's about control, about convincing yourself that in a world gone sideways, you can still kneel, chant, cross yourself, and believe that you've done something to push back against chaos. And that belief, however fragile, keeps you going one more day. By now you've learned that survival depends less on bravery and more on creativity. Or, let's be honest, pure stubbornness. The cities are crumbling under hunger and fear, so you set your feet toward the edges of the world. The scattered villages tucked in forests, mountains, and coastal inlets where people cling to life like moss on stone. The journey itself is grim. Paths that were once trade roads are eerily quiet, broken only by the snap of twigs beneath your boots. You pass abandoned cottages, their doors hanging open, smoke stains blackening chimneys that no longer breathe. Sometimes you glimpse a shape darting into the trees, a fox, a starving dog, or maybe a desperate person who doesn't want company. You clutch your satchel tighter, because in times like these, strangers can be more dangerous than wolves. When you reach a village, the first thing you notice is what they're eating. Forget bread or meat. Those luxuries are long gone. Here, survival means experimentation. Boiled nettle soup is the daily staple, bitter but filling if you squint your taste buds. Acorn flour bread is another invention. Villagers painstakingly leach the bitterness from acorns before grinding them into something resembling flour. One family offers you a flat cake that tastes like sawdust with a hint of tree bark. Because, well, it literally is tree bark, pounded and mixed with moss. And insects, lots of insects. Crunchy beetles roasted over a fire, grasshoppers ground into paste, even worms tossed into broth for protein. At first you gag. Then hunger dulls your pride, and suddenly you're eating like a bird at a banquet. Historians still argue whether widespread insect consumption was a desperate exception or a surprisingly common fallback. Either way, it fills your stomach better than prayers alone. The fringe beliefs here are equally wild. One old man swears that eating black rats will cure you of the fever that stalks the land. Another insists that standing barefoot in moonlit fields will absorb the sky's lost warmth. You politely nod, though you keep your shoes on. Desperation breeds creativity, yes, but it also breeds some questionable health regimens. Life at the edge also means seeing who disappears. You hear stories of families who wander into the forest and never come back. Maybe they starved, maybe they were ambushed, maybe they simply gave up. In one hamlet, villagers speak in hushed tones about a cabin where people went in search of food and were never seen again. No one checks it anymore. You don't press for details. You don't really want the answer. One mainstream fact sticks with you. In parts of Ireland during this period, annals describe failure of bread from the years without sun, with communities reduced to foraging like wild animals. The image of once-proud farmers gnawing on roots haunts you, because it mirrors what you see now, dignity stripped away, replaced with raw instinct. And yet there are sparks of resilience. You meet a woman who weaves fishing nets from strands of flax and braves icy waters to catch what little remains in the rivers. A boy climbs high into the trees, risking falls just to gather honeycomb from hives. People don't give up easily. They improvise, barter, and sometimes laugh at their own misery. One man jokes that his bark bread gives him tree-like strength. It's the kind of humor that's more survival mechanism than comedy, but it works. At night, when you huddle by a fire with villagers chewing on charred grasshoppers, you realize this is humanity stripped down to the bone. Not cities or empires or fancy relics, just people, sharing what little they have, inventing meals out of desperation, clinging to each other against the dark. The edge of the world may look bleak, but it's also where the stubborn will to live shines brightest. You've tasted bark bread and nettle soup, but the whispers that travel along the roads are darker than any hunger pang. Whispers of sickness, of a plague that rides the very breath of the people. You arrive in a town one morning and immediately sense something is wrong. The market square, once noisy with barter and laughter, lies unnaturally silent. Doors are barred. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, not with the smell of stews but the stinging odor of burning herbs, meant to ward off invisible demons. The sickness doesn't look like the fevers you've seen before. It strikes suddenly, cruelly. A neighbor who yesterday was trudging along with a basket may today be lying motionless, their skin covered in dark swellings, breath ragged, eyes glazed. You shudder at the sight, clutching your cloak tighter around you as though fabric could protect against air itself. People whisper the word pestilence, but they don't agree on its cause. Historians still argue whether this was the very first stirrings of the bubonic plague, the same disease that would devastate Europe centuries later, or some other sickness entirely. To you, standing there, the labels don't matter. What matters is survival. The town responds with superstition as much as medicine. Some smear garlic on door frames, convinced it will scare away the illness. Others tie charms around their necks, bits of bone, little crosses, sprigs of herbs. One quirky practice you see: people walk through the streets banging pots, hoping the noise will drive away evil spirits. Honestly, it sounds less like healing and more like a very stressed out orchestra practice, but nobody's laughing. Not really. Priests urge people to confess their sins. The sky darkened because God is angry, one proclaims. Repent and the sickness will pass. You notice the irony: priests themselves begin falling ill, their sermons cut short by coughing fits. Meanwhile, village healers brew concoctions of honey, vinegar, and strange roots. Some even advocate drinking your own urine. You decide that starving might not be so bad after all. As days pass, the air grows heavy with grief. You see funerals where mourners stand far apart, afraid to touch the dead or each other. Families burn their own belongings. Hopping fire will cleanse away contagion. Sometimes entire houses are abandoned, left with doors wide open, meals still on tables, as if life itself fled mid-bite. One mainstream fact echoes in your mind. Procopius, the Byzantine historian, described the plague in Constantinople a few years later, claiming at its height it killed thousands per day. Though you're not in the capital, you imagine those streets choked with corpses, carts hauling the dead like refuse. Whether he exaggerated or not, the fear feels real enough. The strangest part is how quickly rumor outruns truth. In one village, people swear the sickness spreads through starlight, so they shutter windows at night. In another, they claim cats carry the disease, leading to grim purges of animals that once kept vermin at bay. Ironically, the more cats killed, the more rats flourish, and with them, well, you can guess. Desperation makes people blind to cause and effect. One evening, as you sit by a dying fire, you overhear two men debating whether it's better to flee to the countryside or stay put. If you run, you'll carry the plague to others, one says. The other spits into the ashes. Better them than me. You shiver. This is what the sickness does. It corrodes not just bodies, but trust, compassion, the very glue of society. And yet, amid the dread, you notice resilience. A mother caring for her fevered child, singing softly to ease his final breaths. Neighbors leaving food quietly at sick households, even at risk to themselves. Small acts of courage flicker like lanterns against the suffocating dark. Still, you can't shake the feeling that you are living in a world collapsing from every angle. Sun dimmed, crops gone, skis strange, and now disease sweeping through the survivors like a cruel afterthought. You lie awake at night wondering, if this isn't the end of the world, what would the real end look like? At first, you don't notice it. After so long under dim skies, your eyes have grown used to half-light. But one morning you wake and realize the air feels different, warmer. The horizon glows faintly with a sunrise that looks like a real sunrise, not the sickly smudge you've known. You blink, rub your eyes, and for the first time in what feels like forever, the sky carries a color other than ash gray. It's a pale blue, fragile as porcelain, but there it is, a hint that the darkness is loosening its grip. You can't help laughing, a soft, cracked sound. It feels strange, like trying on a forgotten garment. But the relief doesn't erase the scars. When you walk to the fields, you see them dotted with half-rotted stumps where crops failed. Villages look thinner, streets less crowded, laughter rare. Survivors wear the haunted look of people who have walked too long beside death. The land tries to recover, but recovery is uneven. Some regions harvest barley again, enough to bake coarse bread that tastes like hope itself. Others remain barren, their soil choked with the volcanic grit that still lingers in the air. A mainstream fact makes its way into conversation. Some ice core studies suggest sulfur particles remained in the atmosphere for years after 536, prolonging cold summers into the 540s. You feel that truth in your bones, each time the wind turns bitter on what should be a warm day. There's a quirky tidbit you stumble upon. Some villagers celebrate the returning light by holding mock funerals for winter. They craft effigies of darkness, parade them through the streets, then burn them in great bonfires. Children dance around the flames, shouting gleefully that the sun is reborn. You watch, half amused, half skeptical. After all, you've seen the sun vanish before. Who's to say it won't again? As months pass, you notice something else. People don't trust the earth the way they once did. Farmers sow seed nervously, always glancing at the sky. Traders hoard surplus instead of selling freely, fearing famine's return. Even in moments of abundance, meals are eaten with an undercurrent of caution, every bite shadowed by the memory of hunger. And yet life stubbornly insists on continuing. Bobbies are born, their cries sharp against the silence of emptied homes. Fields sprout with tentative green. Neighbors gather again for markets, though smaller than before. The air smells faintly of roasted grain, and your stomach growls at the reminder that joy can still be tasted. Historians still argue whether recovery truly began in the late 530s or dragged on into the 540s. To you, the debate feels abstract. What you know is that your hands still shake at night, haunted by dreams of endless twilight. The memory clings as tenaciously as the ash that once stained your cloak. But here's the paradox. Surviving such darkness gives a strange new appreciation for ordinary things. A ripe apple feels like treasure. Warmth on your skin feels like a gift straight from heaven. You realize that what was once taken for granted now feels miraculous. Perhaps this is what the survivors will carry forward, not just scars, but gratitude sharpened by struggle. Still, as you walk through fields where green shoots break through, you can't help but glance over your shoulder at the horizon. The earth has shown how suddenly it can betray its children. And though light has returned, you know the memory of 536 will never fully fade. It has marked you and the world forever. You've made it this far, scarred but still breathing, and yet the story of 536 is not finished. It echoes long after the skies clear. When you walk through settlements that survived, you notice something unsettling. People whisper about visions, omens, and punishments. Trauma has carved itself into belief. Entire generations grow up convinced the world can vanish at any moment, and that fear lingers like smoke long after the fire is gone. One mainstream fact you overhear is that Byzantine writers later described the sun, dimming as without brightness like the moon, and monks in Ireland noted a failure of bread from the years without sun. These records, scattered but consistent, prove how widespread the memory was. To them, it wasn't just a year. It was a turning point, the kind of scar history can't ignore. The quirky tidbit comes from a coastal village. They bury jars of seeds deep underground, swearing they'll stay safe from the sky's anger. Whenever you ask why, the answer is the same. Because once the sun failed us, and it might again. Some even go so far as to keep tiny food stashes hidden in walls, passing them down like heirlooms. Hunger has become tradition. Historians still argue whether the crises that followed, plagues, famines, political upheavals, were direct consequences of the volcanic winter or simply coincidences amplified by it. You feel the weight of that debate as you walk among crumbled towns where weeds crawl over foundations. Coincidence or not, the connection is obvious to anyone who lived through it. Disaster doesn't stay neatly in its year. It ripples forward, shaping everything in its path. You can feel those ripples in the way people treat the earth. Farmers sow cautiously, never fully trusting the soil. Parents warn children not to rely too heavily on sunlight, telling them stories of the year the day turned to night. Even the songs that rise in taverns carry a darker note, melodies of survival, not celebration. And yet, humans being humans, they adapt. They joke about the taste of bark bread. They marry and raise children under skis they no longer fully trust. They invent little rituals, offering the first fruit of the harvest to the sky, or clapping at sunrise to encourage it to stay. Half superstition, half comfort, wholly human. As you stand on a hill at dusk, watching the horizon glow a more confident orange than it has in years, you realize something strange. The worst year to be alive has become more than a curse. It's a story, one that will be told again and again, shaping how people think about hunger, fear, and survival. You feel yourself becoming part of that story, your memories blending into the long human habit of turning pain into lessons. And the lesson, it seems, is this. The world is fragile and so are we. But fragility doesn't mean weakness. It means learning to bend without breaking. It means remembering the darkness while still stepping into the light. It means carrying forward the scars not as shame, but as proof. You survived when the world almost didn't. You stand now in a world that looks deceptively normal. Fields sway with crops again. Rivers glitter in sunlight, and marketplaces buzz with voices bartering grain, cloth, and fish. But beneath the surface, you sense it. The shadow of 536 never really left. It clings to the survivors like a second skin, shaping how they live, how they pray, how they remember. The mainstream fact is undeniable. This single year has been called the worst year to be alive by modern historians, not because it was the only disaster, but because its cascading effects helped usher in famine, plague, and political collapse across continents. You realize you've been walking through the prologue of what would become centuries of upheaval. Yet life continues with quirks that make you smile. One village has invented a sun festival, complete with painted masks of yellow rays and bonfires that last all night. Children run around shouting, "Don't go away again," while elders pretend to scold the sky for its betrayal. It's silly, but in a world that has seen so much loss, silliness itself feels sacred. And historians still argue whether the catastrophe was the product of one eruption, two, or several stacked in cruel sequence. You shake your head at the thought. For you, the debate feels less important than the memory of cold mornings, ash-coated soil, and the gnaw of hunger in your belly. You sit on a hilltop as the sun sinks, its rays golden and warm. For the first time, you let yourself believe it will rise again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. The darkness has passed, but the story remains, a whisper carried forward, reminding future generations how fragile and resilient humanity can be. And you, weary but alive, know you've walked through history's deepest shadow and found your way back into the light. So now, as the echoes of 536 fade, let your body soften too. Imagine the world finally exhaling, the dust drifting down, the skies slowly clearing. Picture yourself lying in a quiet field at twilight, blades of grass brushing your fingertips, the air warmer than it's been in years. The light is gentle, not blinding, as though the sun itself is whispering an apology. Your breathing slows. Inhale and the air tastes clean. Exhale and the heaviness of ash and hunger slips away. The memory of cold lingers, but only as a shadow, no longer sharp, no longer threatening. You survived it. Humanity survived it. And survival, even in the worst of times, carries its own quiet triumph. Let yourself drift on that thought. The idea that out of darkness can come resilience, and out of fear can come stories worth passing down. Every generation inherits scars, but also strength. Yours has walked through the dimmest year on record, and yet here you are, listening, resting, letting the noise of the past soften into silence. The horizon in your mind glows now with steady light. You feel safe enough to release the tension you didn't know you were holding. Your eyelids grow heavy, the world blurs, and the worst year recedes into distant history. You are here, you are safe, the sun will rise. Sweet dreams.